layers of stories that exist there. And so possibly the true story was in that very temple. And someone came along and felt threatened. Because like with the almond priesthood, there was a thing called the ceremony of the weighing of the hearts, where you'd die and they would say, okay, you're dead, let's have your heart. You'd be met by Anubis, and you'd have to put your heart against the feather of truth on a scale. If your heart was heavy because you'd done immoral things or killed someone or whatever, they didn't want you on the other side, right? So it was a lesson to the populace to live light of heart, right? But then in the later images of the Amun priesthood with the ceremony, they have Horus with his hand on the scale, and you could buy your salvation like going to confession in the Catholic Church. And so you could get Shakti dolls, and this would ensure that you would get to go to the other side. Well, that's still corrupt. And someone was making money to say that you're free. So when Nefertiti and Akhenaten said, you know what, we don't like this game anymore. We want to go to somewhere and start over and do real spirituality, they still say that he was heretic and crazy and deformed and had diseases and everything, and it was a failed experiment. And then they went back to the Amun priesthood making all the money, where people had to give half their harvest to ensure their salvation. Well, isn't that sounding like what we've got now, paying 50% of our taxes, or our salary to taxes? It's the same thing. And aren't people threatened in the same way, that people will be empowered and that people will think for themselves and have altered states and all of that? Right?
Good job. You got it. To the phones we go. Houston, Texas. Troy, you're up with us on Coast to Coast. Hi, Troy.
Good evening. It is an honor. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
You are so clear, Carmen. You are my new hero. You really are. I admire everything you're saying tonight. It's very exciting, and it just makes a lot of sense. I have two small questions before one big question, and I will be quick. Did you say that there's just one age of light each 26,000 years, or do we get to have that twice? I wasn't sure about your take on that.
26,000 years, one golden age, and we're at the bottom of the cycle in the darkest.
Okay. Now, were you talking earlier about other pyramid sites linking together in the area?
Yes.
Okay, great. Something popped in my head. I just thought I'd ask it as a question. And it kind of comes from this book I read, Gods of the Dawn by Peter Lemessurier.
Uh-huh.
And he's got a graph in there that examines the mass of the Earth and Venus and the Moon and the Mars. And he shows how they're all related. And he also shows an extra pyramid and the third pyramid. One's the size of the Moon and one's the size of the Mars. So in my mind, I'm wondering if the other pyramids up and down the Nile, maybe it all links together all of the other planets in our solar system, and quite possibly Nibiru as well, and habitable moons. And I was just wondering if you had an opinion on that. Thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Wow. Okay, well, yes, we've looked at the stellar scale, and the other thing is that why do you keep seeing the solar boat? You see Osiris, you see Isis behind him, and you see Osiris with his sword pointing. So if you look at the stellar scale, we've got the belt of Orion, which is Giza, and then we've got the Pleiades, which is Abusir, and Sirius is always behind. And so they call it the dog star because the dog is following behind a human, right? And if you look at the configuration along the Milky Way, which is the celestial Nile, or the Nile, everywhere that configuration always follows along with it. In other words, I mean, when I looked at it in Starry Night, I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic. They understood. It's clear as day. And so, yes, Nibiru could be part of that. Hakim used to say that Nibiru was Abu Rosh. And it can't, if Orion and the Pleiades are it's up to speculation. Like, we haven't proven what's where, but it's definitely a sky-ground correlation.
Okay, next we go to our west of the Rockies, Margot in Carson City, Nevada. Hey, Margot, go ahead.
This is an awesome show, George.
Oh, she's
God.
something, isn't she? Yep.
Wow. My question is, do you think that Lemuria and Atlantis and the fall of Egypt all have a correlation? Plus, do you think that the priesthood of the Druids in Stonehenge sold out for the same sort of reasons that you were talking about in Egypt, sold out to the Catholic priesthood? Do you think that was the same sort of thing that was going on?
Thank you, Margot. Actually, I do. All of what you've just mentioned were different time frames, but I think that we go through cycles of enlightenment and cycles of corruption, and they are represented in these legends, yes.
Because I had a vision when I was probably about 15 years old, and somehow I was a priest in this kind of round table sort of thing, and we were discussing something that was very important, and it had to do with the future of our culture. And I was disagreeing with this very powerful priest, and this very powerful priest had everybody else on his side, and I decided, okay, that's fine, whatever you decide, I'm going to leave. And I decided to go, and when I stepped outside of some decision had been made, and it was like it skipped in time, and some decision had been made, and I walked outside of this cave-like atmosphere, or this temple sort of atmosphere, and walked outside, and then there were all these balls of light, like they were, you know how there's spheres that have electricity and like little bolts of lightning and stuff, and it was like all these balls of light were being thrown around, and people were screaming and stuff like that, and I met, and all of a sudden this other priest was in front of me and was throwing one of these at me, and I kind of caught it slow motion, threw it back, and destroyed him somehow, and realized that this was the end of an age. This was the end of an era, and nobody was going to understand for an awfully long time. And so I had to leave, and that was the end of the vision. And it was like I suddenly kind of correlated Egypt, and I saw the King Tut exhibit, and I stood at the mask for a long time and felt like there was an awful lot of sorrow in that mask, and I saw the hieroglyphs inside, and none of the other artifacts really interest me except for standing in front of this mask. And the face on that, I realized that he'd been done a terrible injustice at the same time. And it was right around the same time I was having these visions. And so this is a fascinating show, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I just really thank you because you've answered a lot of questions. So I'll get off the line, but thank you so much.
Okay, you are quite welcome. Want to react to any of that,
Yeah,
Carmen?
well, I'm just sitting here with a smile on my face, and the words that keep going through my head, Margot, is that you're one of us. There's some of us that just plain ordinary remember, and we were at these times, the crossroad times. And if you had all those feelings about Tut, you were probably there. There was a number of people who witnessed this sad situation. And it's the retelling of history isn't coming through accurately. And those of us that have cellular memory remember. Now, in terms of those balls of light, it sounds to me like they were being misused. But you'll see, we talk about orbs and ball lightning and that sort of thing in the Pyramid Code. So in the high-level technology episode. So you might find that interesting. Thank you, Margot.
Okay, next up we go to Syracuse, New York. It's Brad, east of the Rockies. Brad, you're up with us.
How you doing, George? Hi, Carmen.
Good, Brad. Thanks.
Once again, great show. George, just real quick, your show has given me a new reason and a new level to start reading books again. And
Perfect.
I was wondering if maybe somewhere on your website you could put like the Coast to Coast Library link to give a little synopsis of the books that you.
You know, that's not a bad idea. I'll get with Lex on that. We'll start working on
So
something.
sometimes you have people on, and I'm out in my garage because I'm not going to wake my wife up. But and then the old low-tech pencil and paper, I never remember to bring that out here. But Carmen, my question to you is, and I heard you speaking of global warming. I've heard of reports that the polar caps on Mars are also shrinking, which, to be honest with you, I don't think we have too much to do with that. And I didn't know if you heard that report, too. Maybe you could give me a little insight on that, and I'll get off. Thank you so much.
Yes, Brad. I actually have heard that all planets are heating up, and it is not something that we necessarily have done. Now, I mean, there's so much speculation about what's really going on with that. And for sure, there's a syndrome that may be changing the temperature of the planet, but it's also a real climate change in that it's cold in some places. But yes, I've heard that all the planetary systems are heating up.
Okay, we go to Scranton, Pennsylvania. Hey, Mike, you're up with us. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, yes, great to talk to you. I'd like to thank you for all your hard work and all your time spent in Egypt. And the thing is, to me,